welcome to the channel. I'm the Kelon Guy, a new face around here, but you'll be seeing a lot more of me around Asgartha over the coming months. I have a background in other trading card games, but I'm particularly excited about Altered, maybe obsessed is a better description. Today, I'm bringing you a recap of the Altered competitive metagame over the past couple weeks, mostly touching on results from the Altered Weekly Online League, or AWOL for short, kickoff event a week and a half ago, and then the following week's AWOL event, then the over 1,000 person Ludotrotter physical event in Angers, France this past Sunday, and my experience playing online via BoardGameArena during the last 2 weeks. Mostly, I'm trying to focus on small changes taking place in deck lists in the attempt of beating the meta, and general thoughts on cards and lines of play that you can take in order to have the best chances of winning versus various key decks. As of yet, playing Altered on BoardGameArena has been fantastic, especially for those of us whose local scene hasn't taken off yet. The thousands of active ongoing games just a few clicks away for free has been a godsend for those of us without a supporting local game store to play at. I've been testing out various heroes and factions via BGA reasonably extensively. You may be able to tell from my name and motif that I'm very much into Kelon Elemental and thus the Traced hero. But I have reached elite rank on BoardGameArena Arena gameplay mode on 4 separate IDs playing Traced, Kojo, Waru, and Fen respectively over this past 2 weeks. How's the meta? It's very diverse, but at least in arena mode, my experience is that Waru is absolutely everywhere. Running the numbers, Waru's been right around 30% of my matches, and I believe a lot of this has been related to players prepping to play what they believe to be the deck to beat before heading to the large tournament this past Sunday in France, but it has been a staggering number. And then over the past week, I've been seeing a lot more of Fen as well. We'll be looking more into Waru and various Waru deck lists later in the video, but I can definitely say that if you're looking to grind your ranking on BGA, you should absolutely make sure you have a plan for heading into the Waru matchup. Other than Waru, however, I must say that the field I've played against has been very diverse. As of yesterday, I've run into the first Argent and Spike player yet, which means I've now played against all the heroes. Shout out to player Chris Days for your hard work on developing a solid Argent strategy. My key takeaways from BGA are thus. 1. Other than Waru, expect to see a lot of Sigismar. Ortis at a base level is strong, has good removal, and an easily synergistic playstyle. Sometimes this will be in permanent-based builds with Ortis Carrier and the Monolith. Other times, there won't be those permanents at all, and you'll just see how efficient playing cheap dudes can be. If you run into Sigismar, always be ready to get charged, and play around it accordingly whenever you can. Ortis Uniques seem to be often just excellent at a base level. From Sigismar, you're likely to see ones that can make extra Ortis recruits, or function as a charge on a stick. And always be ready to counter them playing the Monolith by advancing on both sides. 2. Haven Bravos Bastion is a very powerful card, especially in Axiom decks, which you can expect to see reasonably often despite Traced's abysmal Waru matchup. For a deck already built around playing from reserve, this landmark is essentially the Monolith, but for 2 mana instead of 5. A Sabotage here and there isn't enough to stop the deck either, as a Sabotage in the afternoon still just ends up powering Traced's ability. You need many Sabotages in order to stop the momentum that Traced can create. If you want to tech for this matchup, I would recommend Uniques that can Sabotage multiple times, and otherwise making sure that you have removal that can hit Haven Bravos Bastion so that you can actually play a game to outstat the Axiom characters. 3. Expect to see Teja, Fen, Aphanis. All of the factions are truly playable and represented on BGA. With any of these decks, it's hard to know what to expect from the uniques that you may see. The one exception that I've had to this rule has been Basira. I've had games against Basira where my opponents play not 1, not 2, but 3 nearly game-ending Foundry Armorer uniques that make brass bugs when a character gets a boost to simply win both expeditions even at early stages of the game. And they aren't any weaker in the late game either. If you find yourself against a Basira, I recommend taking lines of play that don't put you dead to an unexpected double advance later on if you have the option. Versus Fen, a hero that I feel has absolutely skyrocketed in popularity over the past week, be aware of the diversity of win-con options that Fen can provide, whether it's simply a consistent plan of anchoring big Anansis, a couple copies of Small Step Giant Leap to close the game, or occasionally Lyra Festival seemingly randomly thrown in as a 1 or 2 of. If you aren't prepared for these things, you will lose to Fen. And that brings us to the results of the first iteration of the Altered Weekly Online League kickoff event, with 86 players. This event culminated in a top 4 of all Waru. I won't go through all of the Waru lists here, instead just focusing on the first place player. Taking down the tournament with a 6-0 finish was Pluka, who I understand has been a top Waru pilot online over the past months. First, let's take a look at Pluka's spells. They're choosing a full set of sticky note seals and teamwork training as their premium removal, and contrary to other lists that I have seen, there are no copies of Charge in the deck, which I love in a list featuring many higher cost bureaucrats. Waru is a deck that has to max out its early bureaucrat count to consistently start setting up its long-term game plan, so it can be hard to find slots in the deck for Charge already, and the slot it most easily starts contesting is that 3 of teamwork training at the same cost. However, against any deck other than Sigismar, teamwork training is often simply a better, more flexible Charge. Maybe it lacks a little of the pop-off to take both expeditions potential, but training cheaply deals with virtually all problem characters up to a very large size, given the number of characters that you're likely to have in play as an Ortus deck. And the ones that are even larger than that, you can deal with very efficiently with sticky note seals. And yes, 2 mana is super cheap for such an effect. Otherwise, I'm liking the Council, which does a great job of gumming up expeditions against decks like Traced or Teja. Nice list and great finish, Pluka. Pluka also managed to get the back-to-back victory by going 6-0 for a second time just this past Wednesday night in another 64-player AWOL tournament, further cementing themselves as one of the leading Waru players at the current moment. Here's some changes that they've made to their listing over the last week. This includes downgrading Thoth to common, redistributing rares towards the Frog Prince to really add some power to early turns, cutting Bountiful Meadow entirely to play a couple copies of the Sandman, and some trimming away from cards like Isatok and the Council to make just enough room for some Ortus Spy and a single copy of Charge to match the lower curve in this version of the deck. Being able to deploy multiple threats as soon as turn 1 is massive for the Waru deck, and these changes absolutely help enable that. Having characters already on board for when you deploy Robin Hood sleeping is a massive help towards getting the Ortus Doom engine running. Then, the other list I wanted to bring up for style points was the 7th place player Reified with a respectable 5-1 finish, playing Rin and Orchid. I've seen Rin played in a Munifestival configuration a few times, and that deck feels reasonably powerful, but this is something else entirely. I love so much about this list. This is an aggro tempo deck, looking to make use of overstated Muna characters like Daughter of Yggdrasil in order to take early expeditions, and then sometimes sticking around via Anchored, and then leverage Rin's ability to keep this aggression going. Note here the out-of-faction Capellias, who you get to play for free when they go to reserve from your hand, and how Rin's ability essentially just puts these directly into play to start the next day with a massive leg up on your next progression. I love this creative build. Big props to Reified for this one. As with Pluka, Reified also ran it back for a second tournament, getting yet another 5-1 finish. This Rin deck is no fluke. I'll be leaving the invite link in the description for the AWOL Discord in case anyone wants to get involved in these tournaments. So far, it's the Americas time zones for these, so I'd especially recommend it to players from North or South America, but anyone can participate. And then that brings us to our biggest event yet for Altered TCG, the over 1,000 person Altered Open in Angers, France, hosted by Ludotrotter. This tournament featured 10 rounds of best of 1 matches, followed by a cut to the top 16 players to battle it out for some incredible prizes. Huge shout out goes to French teams Exalt and Altered Aces, who each put an incredible number of their players into the top ranks of this tournament, really reinforcing that Altered is a skill game, but also how important communities can be for the competitive scene. Nice going to these French teams. Seeing skilled players again and again rising to the top like with these teams proves to me that the game is absolutely worth pouring competitive energy into. Heading into this event a few days after the AWOL kickoff, Waru was definitely the elephant in the room, and Waru performed. We can see some representation of other heroes: Traced, Lindue, 2 Afanas, 2 Fen, and 2 Sigismar. But at half of the top 16 and both finalists, Waru certainly won the day. Let's go through some of these top 16 deck lists and see some interesting ideas. Vittoria's top 16 Sigismar list had a plan to beat Waru, which is to take similar turns off as Waru to set up permanents like Ortus Carrier, and then go way over them with cards like the Monolith and the big shocker of Grand Endeavor. Awesome. Waru may often be incentivized to turn their early drawn sticky note seals removal into mana in order to find ways to deal with all the small problem characters that Sigismar can often present, and this deck aims to punish that decision at every critical point. Very cool. There's even a Kraken in this one for you Kraken enthusiasts. Let's compare that list to Romeo's top 16 Sigismar list, which decides to forgo permanence entirely in order to play more dudes and more removal. This one aims to just provide as few removal targets for sticky note seals as possible. Two different ways of building this deck, and both seem very viable. Then we have Lindue. Lindue is an underdog hero that still managed to put up a top 16 finish. There's none of the bigger, wackier sacrifice characters like the Kraken here. This is just a solid cast of Izmir playables, headed up by some unique jellyfish that let Nico pick up cards back from his reserve. Ithilien also brought an Izmir deck into the top 16 in a Nephanis Spellslinger configuration. It looks like 2 copies of Small Step Giant Leap to close out games is becoming a main feature of Izmir decks in general. Be wary and try not to let them progress close enough to win with Small Step Giant Leap. Then, Axiom made an appearance via Solution's Trace deck that they piloted all the way into the top 8. With the Waru matchup being what it is, it's an impressive finish to make it this far. Solution's deck is very streamlined, and not playing any strange filler in spell slots, for example. There's no copies of Hooked or Boom, it's just 3 Kelon bursts, then 3 Havens as permanents, and a whole lot of gas. It's a nice configuration. I'm particularly opinionated in a positive way about these rare Dr. Frankensteins, where playing the rare over the common reduces the play from reserve cost of this bad boy down to just 2, and he'll most often be getting a Haven boost as well, letting you just chain characters from reserve off the top of your deck in later stages of the game. I personally would like to see a Kelon cylinder in the deck to further enable these Athenas that he's choosing to play, and increase the overall permanent consistency, but hey, Solution's in the top 8 and I'm not, so don't feel the need to listen to me. Then we have Fen. Ricky Lockie is a player that I apparently love losing to online with his Fen deck, and as far as Fen decks go, this is a consistent pile with flexible gameplay patterns. His uniques are all pretty neat and work great with one another. They allow other characters that cost 3 or less to gain anchored either during the afternoon or at dusk, depending on the character. And anyone who's played often against Fen will know how scary anchored aloe veras turn out to be, making more and more overstated Anansis. Removal is critical against this deck to prevent the more absurd character combos from setting up. This is a great finish for a great player. If you find yourself against Fen, make sure to keep cards that allow you to interact with anchored aloe veras or Anansis, or otherwise let you get rid of problem cards from reserve to prevent those characters from sticking around. Skycrier is a fixture of the current early Altered competitive scene, and this top 8 finish with Aphanis just goes to further prove his reputation. Unlike that Bravos Blade Dancer configuration that we saw in the top 16 Aphanis list, Skycrier is playing lots of faction-shifted rares and uniques that get anchored, likely as a way of metagaming against Waru's sleeping bureaucrats to use the same characters to win expeditions multiple turns in a row. Most lists of this Aphanis style that I've seen play Katagiran Mage Dancer at rare, but this one is going for the common in order to favor the raw stats of rare Baba Yaga, enable all those Sneezer Shrooms, and to have a better cheap suite of spells in the full playsets of Beauty Sleep, Magical Training, and Helping Hand. Somewhere on the Altered Academy YouTube channel, there's a clip of him being interviewed during this tournament, which I highly recommend you to go check out. At the least, this deck is able to fight with a decent shot against Waru. Haru managed to navigate a Fen deck all the way to the top 4 of this event, a crazy configuration playing 2 copies of Lyra Festival with the potential of winning the game without advancing in expeditions. As the list is missing cards like Kodama, which would typically be used from reserve to help anchor either key pieces like Aloe Vera, or to go for the win with Festival, I assume that these festivals are less often the proper win condition of the deck, and they're more of a way to throw opponents off balance while being a redraw. Tricky. I believe Haru's unique Martingale also has a strong trigger with the condition of controlling a permanent, so that might help there as well. 3 copies of Cloth Cocoon are standard for the Fen archetype, and Haru is also cutting down on these to 2 copies in order to reduce the number of dead draws that can't be selected away due to the Fen hero. Both this list and the top 8 Fen decks list featured 2 copies of Acapella Training, which gives another axis on which the Lyra deck can fight against Waru by turning bureaucrats that would normally have effects over 4 turns, between the turn that they're played asleep, then awake, then played again from reserve asleep, then awake again, into simply 2-use bureaucrats, which Fen can afford to do because of the additional resources that Fen has thanks to her hero power in the mid-game. Overall, this is a very neat metagame deck, looking to win games by keeping opponents guessing with the Lyra Festival, and then burying opponents in value. But, despite all these brave contenders, Waru took the day representing 8 of the top 16 decks. Sorry for the lack of full shout out to most of the pilots on this list, there's simply too many of you. As we make our way down the list, let's notice a few interesting configurations. The most persistent themes, with just 1 or 2 exceptions, are Monolith Legates, Ozma, Ortis Attorney, Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, and Robin Hood, all at 3 of, with some diversity in rares versus common when it comes to the non-Robin and non-Quetzalcoatl cards. Robin and Quetz are, of course, always at rare. There's more flexibility when it comes to numbers of cards like Ortis Trooper, the Frog Prince, and Sticky Note Seals, and many of these players are choosing to forego most, if not all, of their possible copies of the Sandman, Isatok, Bountiful Meadow, and Charge. There's a lot of Ortis Spy as a sabotage effect that's made its way into these deck lists, despite it not being a bureaucrat. I think the rank 1 and rank 2 list, however, speak the most about the current Waru configuration. Nadir's runner-up deck shows what I believe to be a particularly creative vision of the hero, using his unique slots for incredibly powerful effects that he would otherwise be playing at rare, giving him a couple extra rare slots to distribute between 2 Sandmen, the full set of 3 rare Ortis Trooper, and so interestingly, the rare version of the Frog Prince that I mentioned regarding Pluka's AWOL tournament finishes, which downgrades its stats to 202, but it reduces the cost down of the Frog Prince to just 1 as well. He chooses to play Ortis Cadets in this go-wide, aggressive configuration that also plays 2 copies of Charge to really pop off in the late game. Notably absent from this list and Neuro's winning list are Bountiful Meadow and Isatok, which often come as a pair given the intense mana requirement that Isatok brings. Part of the Waru metagame until now has been a sub-game of, am I allowed to stack characters on one side without getting punished by Isatok? And it seems that the evolution of this sub-game has simply been to adjust the Waru deck list to streamline away from Isatok, considering that opponents likely still have to be thinking about that sub-game anyway, while Neuro and Nadir just run away with the game via leveraging much more aggressively statted cards for their costs than Isatok. I assume not playing Isatok likely helps in the Waru mirror matchup as well. Huge congrats to all these players, but especially to my Swiss brother and Neuro for taking this tournament down. A key takeaway here is that, if you're playing against Waru and starting to worry about stacking stats on one side, after this tournament it seems likely worth gambling that they won't have Isatok. Others in these top 16 lists were cutting, or at least shaving numbers of them as well, as deck lists seem to overall be shifting downwards in cost. Yes, you have my permission to blame me the next time you play into an obvious Isatok and lose. Just say, some guy on YouTube told me this was a good idea. Let me know in the comments which of these decks was your favorite, or if you have a Muna or Bravos deck that you think would have worked well in this top 16. I'd love to look through any ideas that you may have. There was a tournament recap with some statistics posted on the Altered.gg official website, which I'll link below in case you want to read it yourselves. But here's my key takeaways. Waru was less than 8% of the overall meta, behind Fen, Sigismar, and surprisingly the most played hero, Teja. Waru boasted the best conversion rate, however, both into the top 128 and then clearly into the top 16. Overall, Ortis represented 50% of the top 128, Sigismar also performing wonderfully last weekend. The faction that struggled the most was that of the most represented hero, Teja, who frankly got absolutely annihilated. Muna didn't manage to get a single player into the top 32 of the event, despite this high player count. Overall, the heroes that didn't have any representation at the top tables were Nevenka and Orak from Lyra, Arjun from Muna, Atsadi from Bravos, and Sierra from Axiom. Struggling, but at least present, were Rin and Golrang, who each had a single pilot reach the top 128 of the tournament. So, now what? Do we simply live in a Waru-dominated world, forced to suffer spending an additional mana on everything we do for the rest of time? Well, yes, Waru is firmly the deck to beat. However, we've gone quite literally just a few weeks since the release of a brand new card game in Altered. I've played formats of games like Magic the Gathering where there's been a dominant deck for quite literally years, and I can assure you, even without the new Altered set which will come in January, there's plenty of metagaming that can still be done in the meantime. For those of you who are crying for bans just weeks in, dry those tears and get some decks cooking. There was a fantastic Reddit thread posted on the Altered TCG subreddit about beating bureaucrats. I'm linking the post below. This is good reading for at least getting the juices flowing about how players can fight against Waru. Especially if you're planning on playing in any of the more competitive tournaments, this one is worth a read. Although I don't love the picture choice of Amelia for Strategy 3 playing over them, given how unplayable Amelia feels into Robin Hood, I do agree with the concept. I've built an anti-Waru counter deck that is both hilarious and seems to be working, mixing both the playing over them and the problems they can't beat aspects of this post. If you're interested, I'll have a deck tech and VOD review of some BGA footage of this deck of mine coming soon. And lastly, before I go, Team Exalts have a 2-day online tournament coming in just over 2 weeks, the 26th and 27th of October. It has a €1 entry fee to support prizing. All details are on the Exalts Discord, which I'm also linking below. I have no affiliation with this tournament or team, but I'll absolutely be playing in case any of you want to show up and crush my dreams of winning. All matches will be on BoardGameArena, so things are nice and simple, and registration is open until the 24th. Until next time, may you have enough mana for all your spells and enough gas in the tank. I'm the Kelon Guy, signing off. Thanks for watching.